Good morning, guys. Welcome to another Biology with Miss Cherry. Today we're going to be looking at natural selection. So I want you to start by looking at the graph below. See if you can define what natural selection is, what the graph shows. On the y-axis it's population number in individuals. And why would the data shown by the graph increase the likelihood of a population succeeding? So look at the trend shown and explain why that is a benefit or an advantage to a population in its chances of resisting change. So pause and play again when you're ready. So as I've said, this lesson is all about natural selection. We're going to take the time looking over some keywords, and then we're going to have a look at how reproductive rate is going to affect the size of our population. So before we carry on, we're going to start looking at those keywords, as I said. And this is a new one that you might have heard about maybe when thinking about bacterial growth, but also potentially not. Although if you do geography, you might well have come across this quite regularly. So what is a selection pressure? What does it mean? And what is an example of a selection pressure? So you can look at your glossaries in your textbooks. You can have a little Google. So pause. Write down what you think and then play again when you're ready to amend that keyword definition. So a selection pressure is an environmental factor, so it's to do with where an organism lives, that limits the population size of a species, so the number of individuals available to survive. And this includes things like predation, disease and competition, and all of those three factors we're going to take a look at over the next couple of weeks while we finish off module 7. So we're moving away from the genetics now as a standalone topic, and instead we're starting to look at how genetics and the environment can start influencing how big or how small a population is. Now the selection pressure or pressures on an organism vary depending on where they are. So the selection pressures in a rainforest are very, very different to the selection pressures in a desert, for example. But ultimately, all selection pressures can have an effect on the gene pool. And remember that keyword from a couple of lessons ago, like the combination of alleles available in a population and the proportion of each allele available in a population. So natural selection, as I've said, is the focus of this lesson. And definition-wise, it's where individuals most suited to the environment are more likely to survive and reproduce. And that's where your GCSE definition ended. But for A-level, we have to add this final little bit on. And that survival and reproduction means that we pass on advantageous alleles to offspring. And I'm going to highlight this because I need you to have a mass attention drawn to it. That advantageous alleles is normally a standalone mark in any mark scheme. Now, we recognise this as a process of evolution. Survival of the fittest, those best suited to a place are going to be able to live better. But I want you to think about what factors affect natural selection. So what is going to increase or decrease the chances of evolution? You can pause and play again when you're ready. Now, there are a few things you could consider. You might want to consider something like reproduction rate. Because the more babies I have, the more likelihood there is that a mutation is going to occur. You might also talk about mutagens, so whether we're exposed to them, for example. You might also consider about the selection pressures and also how often they change. So if they're seasonal, for example, at one point one allele might be advantageous, but at another point that might be completely useless. Lots of factors are able to increase and decrease the chances of evolution, and you might have got extras, you might have got none of those, and we're going to take a look at especially reproduction rate over the next few slides. So as we can see, here we've got a few of those methods of inducing natural selection, or the ones that are going to increase the chance of natural selection occurring. So having enough offspring, as we've said, is the key one, either having lots of babies or not a lot of babies. Ensuring that we've got genetic variety within a population of all species, so all of the predators and the prey, is going to affect natural selection as well, because we're going to maybe be aiming for different organisms depending on the environment. And finally, the varieties of phenotypes selected for. So the ones that are advantageous in one area might not be, as we've said, the ones that are advantageous in another area. The key example being things like Darwin's finches, where the beaks were slowly adapting and evolving over time to the food resources available on each of those islands. And that means that the selection pressures on each separate ecosystem are not the same, and that gives us that variety, but also means that there's going to be natural selection occurring in those different areas differently. So we get that variation within the species there as well, because they're all still finches, or they're all still that specific type of finch, but they're slowly changing genetically over time. So have a think about this question. Why is it evolutionarily advantageous that a male seahorse can give birth to up to 2,000 babies at a time? Think about why it might be good. There would be a little gif over here of a male seahorse basically exploding with babies, but I guess you can Google it if you really fancy. So pause and play again when you're ready to go through the answers. Think about why it might be evolutionarily advantageous for that male to have a bajillion babies at once. And the major reason why these overproduction of offspring is so useful is because as soon as those baby seahorses are born, they're left to fend for themselves. I don't know about you, I can barely brush my teeth without spilling it down myself, let alone having 2,000 babies at once. So as soon as that dad has given birth to those babies, they're alone. And only 1% of them is going to survive to adulthood. Now, if you only had maybe 2 babies a year and 1% of them survive, that's not very helpful in terms of keeping the population going, is it? Because not even a whole baby would be alive still. But if you've got 2,000 babies and only 1% survive, you may be looking at 20 offspring that are going to be able to survive and continue on that genetic line. Now, when we're thinking about why so few survive, there's a few different reasons that you might be able to think about. You've got competition, you've got some resources available, but also we've got to remember things like predation. And to summarise, these high reproductive rates occur in lots and lots of organisms, things like rats, the seahorses as well that we've said, hamsters have lots of babies at a time, ensure that a sufficiently large population is able to reproduce. But remember that having lots of babies at once is beneficial because it means that we can get that large population, but it's also sort of a compensation factor. So the seahorses are compensating for the fact that if I've got loads of babies, they might be more at risk of predation. They're going to be more competition between those babies, so for food, for light, for space, and also accounting for things like natural disasters or extremes of temperature change. So when global warming is a significant factor, for example, some of those little baby seahorses might not be able to survive, which is a horrible thing to think about. You're having so many babies to account for the fact that quite a few of them, the majority of them, are going to die. But evolutionarily, it's advantageous because you've still got enough to carry on that gene line. And then there's some organisms that don't have a high reproductive rate. So imagine we've got a species like apes, like us, that don't have a high birth rate each pregnancy. I mean, generally the uniform human pregnancy or birth rate with a pregnancy is 1, maybe 2 at a push, but very rarely more than that. So what other behaviours do humans and apes display to increase the chances of offspring reaching adulthood? What kind of things do we do to help a baby survive? And generally we say for apes, for very developed organisms, there is a high parental influence. So our babies, as humans, stay with us for a long time. For apes, it's the same. The parents are going to be able to teach and develop the skills for the baby in order for them to be able to survive alone successfully. So there's a lot of sort of wrapping a baby in cotton wool to begin with, keeping it safe, keeping it protected, and slowly exposing them to dangers and skills and other things that they might encounter in their life. If we compare this to the seahorses are born and then the dad's like, cool, you go survive now. If you die, you die. Whereas we spend a lot more time making sure our baby is ready for the world. Now, these cared for babies, the ones with parental influence, apes and things like that, are going to have much lower death rates because of that sort of coddling, the protective aspect of the caring. And that means that, again, the population is able to survive. So there's a bit of the toss-up, isn't there? There's fewer babies, but a little bit more care, so they're going to be able to survive a little bit better. Or loads of babies at once, but lots of them die. And I want you to decide which you think is better. Is it better to have a large birth size, so lots of babies, and allow some of them to die, or to have a few babies and care for them really well so they survive into old age, or at least to adulthood? It's your decision. Think. Give a reason why. Now we're going to move into thinking about intraspecific competition, so competition within the species, so between individuals, between us, and how natural selection can be affected by that large number of offspring. So have a go in your own words at answering each of these questions. I'm here if you've got any issues or you're not too sure, but why is it disadvantageous to have a large number of offspring produced at one time? Are the deaths of the 99% of baby seahorses random? Why or why not? So you might want to think about the environment. What might be different about that 1% that do survive? So maybe you won't want to consider their looks or their behaviour. And what might happen to that 1% if the selection pressures change? So maybe the water has been dyed green, for example. Something like that. Have a go answering those in full sentences. I'm going to have a look through your OneNotes and see what the crack is and how you are answering those questions. Remember, we're using keywords. You need things like gene pool. You might want to use the words variation. Have a look at those Module 7 keywords that are on the admin page and see how many of them you can apply to your answers. And another bit of independent work for you guys to do before we look at some exam questions. Take a look at the boxes and the photos that I've put on OneNote for me, the role of variation in natural selection, and then complete how science works, how genetic variation leads to natural selection, copper tolerance in grasses, because remember, we don't just care about seahorses, we care in some aspect about plants too. So have a go at those. Should take you maybe 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. To be honest, I'm guessing completely. I have no idea how long those tasks are. But I'm going to say 10 to 15 minutes. All right, so pause and then play again when you are ready to have a go at some exam questions. All right, so we're going to take a look at some exam questions, bringing in some other ideas from Module 7, but also looking at how the exam questions try to bring in variation in a population in a really disgusting way. So malaria is a disease that is spread by insects called mosquitoes. In Africa, DDT is a pesticide used to kill mosquitoes to try and control the spread of malaria. Mosquitoes have a gene called KDR. Today, some mosquitoes have an allele of this gene, KDR-, so KDR-, that gives them resistance to DDT. The other allele, KDR+, does not give resistance. Scientists investigated the frequency of the KDR- allele in a population of mosquitoes in an African country over a period of 10 years. Use the Hardy-Weinberg equation to calculate the frequency of mosquitoes heterozygous for the KDR gene in this population in 2003. So pause now, have a go, recap the Hardy-Weinberg equation lesson. If you're not sure, I think it was lesson 9 for Module 7. And attempt the question. I'll show you the mark scheme and the answers in a bit. Question 2. Suggest an explanation for the results in the figure above. So look at the pattern, say what you can see over time, and give a reason why the results are the way they are. Remember what KDR- means, how that affects the organism. Think about how it relates to DDT. It's 4 marks, so you need to give some detailed reasons as well. Pause. Play again in about 5 minutes. So here we've got the stem again. The KDR+ allele, codes for sodium ion channels found in neurons. When DDT binds to a sodium ion channel, the channel remains open all the time. Use this information to suggest how DDT kills insects. So now we're thinking back to Module 6. Good luck. 2 marks. Use the information to suggest how DDT kills insects. Pause for about 3 minutes and play again when you're ready. And the final question, using that information, so the fact that the KDR plus opens a sodium ion channel permanently, how does the KDR minus allele give resistance to DDT? 2 marks again, pause for about 3 minutes and then play again in a sec when you're ready to go through the answers. So the first question had an answer of 0.32. Accept 32% for 1 mark maximum. Hopefully you wouldn't have done that. But also, if you've recognised 2PQ as heterozygous, so the KDR plus, KDR minus genotype, then you can get 1 mark for that as well. If you're not sure how to get this answer, let me know and I can show you the worked through live in the lesson. Now, question 2 was asking about the pattern or the reasons for the pattern shown in the graph. And you should have recognised that over time, so as time's gone on, the incidence of that KDR minus allele increases. So the first thing to say is that a mutation has produced that KDR minus or the allele for resistance. And the DDT is a selection pressure. So you have to mention what the benefit is or what the mutation has provided and then the pressure that is being put on that population. You then got to explain why that mutation is advantageous for that selection pressure. And this is our standard natural selection answer. So mosquitoes with the KDR minus allele are more likely to survive and to reproduce. Remember, and I told you this, that the last mark is generally always telling me about the allele frequency in a population. So that KDR minus allele is going to increase in the gene pool in that population. For question C, asking about the killing or how the DDT kills organisms, the neuron remains depolarized because those sodium ion channels are open, they can't close. Remember, we're looking at our action potential graph again. And if the voltage gated sodium channels up at the very peak can't close, then there's going to be no action potentials that are able to be transmitted because there's no repolarization, there's no passing on of those signals. The way that the KDR minus mutation might work, and again, this is very lateral thinking, bringing together ideas of enzymes and substrates and changes in protein structure. The mutation, the KDR minus, might change the shape of the sodium ion channel or of a receptor. And therefore the DDT is no longer complementary or can't bind, so it can't keep those sodium channels open. If you've got any questions about today's lesson, let me know. I'm here if you need me. Hope you found that useful, and I'll see you again next time. Bye.